That was terrific. It wasn't planned, but it actually covered all, we had finance and the sort of global system. We had what's happening in economics and both national and international politics. And these are all interacting and exactly as George said. What I'd like to do is maybe just throw out two questions for the panel, and then at least we'll have 15 minutes for questions there. But the first thing I wanted to say is, to Ken, is that this is primarily supposed to be a conference about where economic theory goes and so on. And you said quite rightly that, you're sitting here almost kind of Daniel in the lion's den, at least defending that there's something about economics as it's been taught over the last 20 years that has worked. The question I'd like to ask you is, do you think there are any ways in which the kind of political economy issues that have been raised by all the other three speakers and actually by yourself, and also the intrinsic radical uncertainty that George was talking about, are there any ways that these concepts can be built into what you called disciplined technical economics? Or do we have to just accept that there's a bifurcation, that there's going to be, on the one hand, the historical empirical economics, which actually yourself have done very, very successfully, and on the other hand, the stuff that your graduate student was talking about, which is described as economic research, but has little to do, less and less to do, with what's going on in the real world?
Well, I mean, briefly, I like to think that, we'll see progress in both directions, that there'll be work which is more technical in nature, where people experiment with different approaches for trying to understand the world, and approaches which dispense of the models. But I do think one area where this is more about universities than economics is there is a lot of inertia in disciplines, and to get tenure you need to be in a discipline, and yet the kind of issues that are being talked about here are very interdisciplinary, and universities play lip service to it, but it's actually very, very hard to deal with in the organizational level, and I think that's an area where universities need to rethink that, of how to deal with interdisciplinary scholars more effectively.
But do you think that it is, at least in theory, in principle, possible to build in the kind of radical uncertainty we're talking about into the kind of clearly parameterized models that are now regarded as the gold standard of economics?
I think mathematics has a role in philosophy that will continue to be very, very useful and provide a discipline, but I think it is important to be humble about how far you can go with those things. And sort of where big mistakes are made is certainly where people have false confidence. Bill White, the former chief economist at the BIS, likes to quote that, it's not what you don't know that hurts you, but what you think you know and don't. And I think there's a lot of truth of that in the way economics is applied.
Okay, and the question that related I'd like to throw, particularly I think to Jean-Paul, but also to Harold James, is there perhaps another way of doing economics, which one might call more based on the sort of European model of political economy, both intellectually and in practice, the kind of economics that has been applied in Europe, which is, if you like, the kind of social market concept, but the mixed economy model, which has been the driving force, certainly, of European politics for the last 30 years, but doesn't really have much of a role in academic economics anymore. Why is it, in a sense, that there hasn't been a European economics describing the kind of, rigid but actually rather successful labor markets that we see in Germany and Scandinavia? Why is it that there has not been a respectable form of academic economics emerging from the European tradition as opposed to the American tradition? Do you have any thoughts on that? Let's have Jean-Paul and then Harold.
First,
and then
European economics is basically American economics.
Yeah, but why?
As far as academic research is concerned, But I don't think we should try to nationalize economic theory. For example, the issue I was speaking of are modelized. I mean, they are easy to modelize, and they have been modelized.
You mean things like inequality, for instance?
The fact that the median voter is for redistribution. So for a different kind of distribution, which is going through the market, that is technical in nature and can be proved and shown. The problem where we have some hole is in our measurement system, because we are measuring everything in efficiency in terms of GDP. And we have no idea how to measure the real effect of on well-being, quality of life, and so on. So maybe it's not that we are using the false models. It is that we are defining the variable of the model in a fuzzy way, because we are speaking about welfare economics, but we are not really doing welfare economics, because we are relying on variables which are out of the national account system, which will not report the evolution of the well-being of a citizen. And second, we are in a kind of trap, because we know that and everybody here is for democracy, but we know that democracy is a local regime. It is not a global regime. And our problem is how to make the road for democracy being a global regime. How can we invent? And it's where we need the help of economic theory, I mean pure economic theory, but also pure political theory. That are the main issue. Uncertainty came in the picture, but uncertainty is, immanent to economics. Innovation creates uncertainty. The fact that the future will depend of individuals create uncertainty, and true uncertainty.
Perhaps I could put the same question to you, Harold, and just sort of focus a little bit more, on what Jean-Paul has not perhaps quite responded to in the same way. What I meant was, there are, if you look at the European economies, they are managed in clearly different way from the American economy. And yet, it strikes me that what is defined as gold standard economics is essentially trying to describe a political economy which is, as in fact close to and beyond the American economy, and is not the political economy of Germany or France or Sweden. Why is it that there isn't a more powerful sort of set of economic academic tools trying to describe those different political economies, if you like?
It's a very interesting question. I think there was once
there was, yes.
Exactly this. But it also gets to the question of, did economists give us the right tools to deal with the recent events? And the answer is, for the most part, yes. They did really do that. In those areas in which economics is brilliant at giving the right answers. In other words, where you can aggregate and you can make simplifying assumptions that present something that is then capable of being presented in a model. So if you think of monetary policy or if you think of fiscal policy, these are both areas where people have learned something. But another area of dealing with the economic crisis, how you restructure big financial institutions in the aftermath of a collapse, that's not something that's intrinsically capable of having those those models and those generalizations applied. So we've done well on the monetary policy front, it seems to me. But we haven't really done well on the other front. And there was indeed a tradition of thinking about historical institutionalism. I mean, this was big in the United States as well, but it was largely really extruded from the economics profession in the early 20th century. And it does seem to me that we need something of this expertise of but it's more a kind of craftsman-like thing. It's more like learning how to make a very detailed, complicated, old-fashioned watch. And you need a lot of practical skill about this. And it's not really, it doesn't lend itself easily to the simplifying generalization, which is really capable of yielding very, very big insights, but not in that particular area.
That's great. Now, I'm going to ask George a question, and then I would like to open it to the floor. And what we'll have is perhaps time for 3 or 4 comments or questions from the floor, and then maybe everybody on the panel can respond to whichever ones they want. But George, the specific question I wanted to ask you is, so you gave this marvelous list of the tensions and contradictions that exist today, from the financial regulation to the euro crisis to climate change and the international currency system. The question, just very simply, that I have for you, you spend a lot of time talking to politicians and global leaders as well as the business community and so on. To what extent do you think it is the absence of an intellectual understanding of the issues that is an obstacle to resolving some of these tensions? Or is it simply that there are very, very different political, special interests involved? So are the problems really, do they have anything to do with a failure of understanding of the way that the political economy works? Or is it actually just simply a clash of inherently conflicting interests that's behind these things?
Look, I think that this concept of reflexivity, that is to say positive and negative feedback, is just as applicable to politics as it is to economics. In fact, perhaps even more so, because it's clear that in politics everything is biased. So the role of bias is very important. And you've got ideas, political slogans even, that either sort of catch on. You have things like transfer union in Germany that catches on. And it really transformed the political attitudes in Germany towards Europe. And similarly, of course, in America, where you've got people actually manufacturing these slogans, and very successfully. And then they either catch on, and then they have a sort of a life, or even a half-life, of where they are rising and gaining momentum. This boom-bust idea for politics applies also. Now, and I think that in economics it would be easier to model it than it is in politics, because in politics you deal with ideas, but in economics you have things like prices and so on, which are really quantitative and easily measured. And there are these models of evolutionary in evolutionary systems theory, predator and prey relations, which don't give you a determinate outcome. It can, you vary one variable a little bit and you get a totally different sequence. But it can be modeled, and actually modeling can help a lot in understanding what the options at any one moment in time is. So I somehow hope that this could somehow, I'm not capable of doing it myself, but I hope that there are people in the room who can do it. And why don't you have more agent-based modeling? I mean, it's catching on. I mean, it's growing. But I think there is a lot of future for preserving the sort of concreteness of economics, and yet modeling the inherent uncertainties.
Yeah, and potentially the clearer and more realistic thinking about economics, well, my view for what it's worth, I know I'm not supposed to express a view, is that it could actually affect these political boom-bust processes as well. You know, if people had clearer and more coherent, if economists had clearer and more coherent things to say about the world as it is, you know, and I think your book with Carmen Reinhardt has been a very good example of that, it can actually have a very significant effect on political thinking and the kind of contradictions you were talking about.
I think that you know, we've had what I call the Enlightenment fallacy, where the reason was supposed to be something separate from reality, sort of like a searchlight illuminating reality. Now, reality in social sciences is reason, or the thinking of the participants, is not something separate and outside. It's inside the phenomenon that you think about. And that makes actually that reality much more difficult to predict. And in fact, you cannot come up with a kind of Popperian, universally valid, deterministic generalizations.
Okay, we've got 10 minutes left, so are there perhaps 3 or 4? There's a question, there's a point there, one there, and one there, and one there, and that will be 4. We can go on till 6:15, we're told, because we started late. Okay, well, I've already forgotten about the order, but that lady was there first. And perhaps you could just introduce who you are so we all get to know each other gradually.
Hi, my name's Anne Pettifor from Prime Economics in London. I'm very struck by what Professor Rogoff said about the levels of debt that there are, but also by 2 comments from the panelists about how we've not had a Great Depression, and yet, Professor Rogoff, as you rightly say, we haven't dealt with that debt. And the way we could deal with it would be by increasing income to enable people and firms to pay down debts, or by writing off those debts. And we're doing neither. On the contrary, we're increasing in Europe the amount of debt in the economy, and we're cutting incomes. So how can the panel be confident that we're not going to have a Great Depression, that it's not going to happen?
Great question. So I think what we'll do is we'll listen to all the questions and then write them down, and then I'll give everybody a minute to respond to whatever one they think is most relevant. Robert Skidelsky.
Yeah, Robert Skidelsky. I wanted to ask a question about the relationship between economics and politics, which the panel discussed very interestingly. What sort of politics should you have if markets are in a position to short governments, which they have been doing very enthusiastically in the last 2 or 3 years? I'm thinking of the British case here, where in May in 2010, most people believed, or were led to believe, that unless the programme of budgetary cuts was much deeper than under the Labour government, then Britain would go the way of Greece. In other words, the British government would have to pay 10% for its borrowing. Now, that was the generally accepted belief at the time, and that justified the programme of cuts. But as it happened, a lot of that belief was based on the fact that this is exactly what the opposition had been saying before the election, that unless the programme of cuts was more savage than the government had been, then of course, then indeed Britain would go the way of Greece. Now, what is the duty of an opposition under those circumstances? It seems to me either you have some way of restricting capital mobility, or you have to have some way of restricting the opposition. Now, I mean, is that a reasonable choice?
Very
Thank
good.
you.
Another very good question. Roman, yeah. Actually, as we've got a little time, why don't we'll do these 3 questions, and then we'll do another round of 3 questions or comments.
Thanks. I'm spared having lectures because I'm grateful to the organizers for distributing my book with Michael Goldberg's, but I just want to bring something to your attention. From the beginning of the panel, we've talked about change, a lot of unforeseen change, and then we wonder about what's wrong with theories. So I wanted to suggest a simple answer since I have very little time. If we have a theory that assumes away unforeseen change, and then we want to explain how financial markets and governments work and political economy we have, I think we have a problem in the basis. So I think that we have an elephant in the room problem. We think we can fix it, but maybe there is something fundamentally wrong with the foundations of what we do, and maybe I don't want to comment on the discipline because there's just not time for it, but I just wanted to suggest that there is a dissonance between what we're trying to explain, which is the world that capitalism thrives on non-routine change. We have also other things that cause non-routine change that we hit by them all the time. And then we have a theory that, as Rapp put it at the beginning of the session, creates an illusion of control, namely the theory that assumes away non-routine change. I think we may want to think about that.
Thank you very much. So we'll answer those 3 and then have maybe another 3 or 4 questions. Maybe we could actually start with the last one. And I think, Ken, you're the right one to answer that. In a way, it's similar to the question I asked. Is the kind of economics that we've been teaching for the last 20 years capable of dealing with unforeseen change and so on?
Yeah, I'm not quite sure what to make of it. I mean, I think what George Soros said is right, that we don't have a good model of knighting uncertainty. And so as soon as you have to basically understand that your model is not complete because there are things you just didn't think of, and it's very hard to fit in an algorithmic way. There are people who've tried to do that, by the way. There's a whole literature on knighting uncertainty, but it's very it's very difficult fundamentally. How do we model the unmodelable? So I think at the end of the day, we can try to make our systems more robust, and nothing's perfect. I wasn't quite sure what to make of that. I wasn't quite sure what to make of Lord Skidelsky's questions. I'll pass on that. On the will we have a Great Depression? I mean, we can't. What am I going to say? That I'm certain it's not going to happen because it's not in my model.
No, but what do you say specifically to Anne's point that actually the debt levels, it's a point you made yourself, the debt levels arguably are actually growing further, far, far from diminishing. So are we getting closer to another potential tipping point?
I think George rightly said, at least I was hearing it that way, that this notion that we're sort of far from equilibrium, that's a piece of it. There's also others where the debt just didn't get deflated. It's really, really high. And so we have a lot of problems going forward because we deal with that. I suppose on the plus side, we probably are more likely to face a long grind than a panic because we've retreated a lot from the completely free market. The government's gone out and guaranteed everything, and how that will play out, we'll see.
Jean-Paul,
Okay.
all 3 or any of them that you want to comment on.
I will begin by the last question. It is almost an impossibility theorem to have a model of uncertainty. And that means that we should not ask for too much. I know that Roman is doing a lot of work in this direction, and is almost successful. It is clearly the right direction to go, but that leads to another question. should we accept as a model which is just only because he refuses uncertainty? Take a rational expectation. Rational expectation is an assumption which is perfectly acceptable if the world tomorrow will resemble the world of yesterday. If there is some innovation, it does serve no purpose. So the danger with that is not so much with the assumption of rational expectation, but with the fact that you give it the possibility of explaining the events. That's not possible. Okay. The second question by Professor Kaletsky. Should we restrict capital mobility or the opposition? Of course, you should restrict capital mobility. There is no doubt.
What about in China?
Well, even in China.
They restrict both. They restrict both. But
they are doing both. They are doing
exactly.
both. No, but if it is that the choice, I would, without hesitation, choose to restrict capital mobility. Now, the problem of debt, the fact that we are not in a depression because government acted, but the fact that the debt problem is so huge, and one of the new policy now is to restrict income, may lead to the Great Depression. Maybe here we have to distinguish two moments. The first reaction of a government which avoided the depression was not a reaction which was geared at decreasing income. But then the fear of a public debt led to a lot of austerity program, especially in Europe. And this austerity program would have as a consequence what you are saying. It's why you're right. There is still the possibility of having a future depression if we stick to this kind of austerity policies in one of the biggest countries of the world. I mean, Europe, in terms of GDP, is the second country of Europe, because we will not solve the debt problem, but we will have less income to service the debt. That's the big problem.
Harold?
Yeah, on that problem, I don't think this is just a European issue. I think this is a pretty general one. And I thought that was why the question was so important, because it does strike me that if you just put together a conventional list of what we think the causes of the big financial crisis were, the story of the subprime mortgages, the story of financial institutions that are too complex and have wrong incentives, and the macroeconomic story of either global imbalances or cheap money, that we've all got all of them with us still in some form or other. I mean, maybe the housing market has corrected, but we've corrected it in a way that produces a big explosion of other forms of debt, because people are struggling so much that they're running up credit card debt instead. So in essence, we've got all the elements there. And that, it seems to me, is exactly what's leading to this sort of sword of Damocles hanging over our head, and is indeed one of the worries. And that goes on really with Robert Skidelsky's question about the markets shorting politics. It seems to me that this is exactly the story that is producing the logic of the concentration of power, that only really, really big concentrations of power can think of themselves as being able to stand against it. So the United States can do probably a better job than small European countries, or China can do a better job than small European countries. And, you know, if you think of the vulnerability that's created by a big financial sector in a small country, this is the story of Iceland or of Ireland, it's very, very clear that if you're a small country, you want to avoid that kind of position. And so in the future, it seems to me that we're likely to have big banks, but they're going to be associated with big countries because that's where the risk is transferred.
George, do you want to comment on any of those points?
Yeah. Well, I think as far as Roman Friedman's question, if the future is genuinely unpredictable, then models that are supposed to give you definite predictions are not realistic. So you need models that allow for the unpredictability, because the future is not predetermined. It's being determined in the course of the future as people, participants, including authorities, react to the situation. So therefore, predictions must factor in the behavior of the agents and the behavior of the authorities. And then I think they can help to determine the range of possibilities, but cannot tell you exactly what is going to happen, because that's not yet formed. It's evolving. So to me, you need to stop imitating the physics. I mean, even physics has now recognized some in quantum physics unpredictabilities. So it's time to move on.
If I could just interrupt you to supplement what you're saying, I think part, it seems to me anyway, that part of the theoretical, formal way of approaching this, of what George is saying, is that you can have models which are still, quite detailed mathematical models, but where the structure of the model itself changes over time, depending on events and potentially even with a random element in it, which I think that's the approach that Roman and Michael Goldberg and a few others have been pursuing. And that seems to me, at least in principle, quite a promising one, which also is close to the evolutionary concepts that you were talking about and biology. So I think there are some actually quite disciplined, as you put it, Ken, model ways, sort of templates for thinking about these issues, which it seems to me economists could learn more from. Sorry to interrupt you.
No, they're absolutely right.
Yeah.
And then as the all three questions were, I think, excellent questions. The interaction between markets and politics. I mean, that is the nature. I mean, that's the true reflexive connection, and the question really is that do politicians actually lead the market, or do they follow the market? And I think the role of politicians is to lead. That's what makes them statesmen. And then if they lead well, the markets follow. And as far as the other question, I don't think that the accumulation of sovereign debt could ever lead to a Great Depression. Private debt, yes, because the over-indebtedness of households and the interaction with the housing market can cause a depression. But sovereign debt, since the sovereign can print money, it cannot lead to default. It can lead to inflation, which in turn can cause great distress and so on, but not there are no, I don't know of any hard quantitative restriction as to how much sovereign debt is too much. When you look at, I mean, you look at Japan with 200% and everything else, it's unsustainable, and eventually there will be a big shift where interest rates will jump from 1% for 10-year bonds to something much more significant. And that will be a big adjustment for Japan. But at the moment, you can still borrow for 1.2% for 10 years. So and that's 200% debt equity ratio. Then, therefore, that 90% that you mentioned is not necessarily hard and fast loop.
I mean, just to interject, I agree, but it's a rare bird to be floating, you know, much above that for long, and you have to ask why historically it's been so rare.
But I don't think you've ever suggested 90% is a point where they go bust, but 90% is a point where they slow down,
Right,
they begin to
growth.
suffer all kinds of structural
And-
problems,
and
which
it also
arguably Japan
becomes,
is a good example of that.
Yeah, and the debt becomes self-reinforcing, and as interest rates go up, that reinforces the. So it's more.
Shall we
If
give
I
them?
was,
Okay.
If I was speaking of Europe, it is because in Europe, state can't
Yes.
print money.
Yeah.
So the only way they can do it is through a restriction of the private sector.
Yeah, because they're not genuine sovereign borrowers now. They're more like state borrowers. Shall we have maybe one question there? Oh, my God, there are so many. I think one question there, one there in the middle, I think John Kane, one in the front, very briefly, and even if we don't have time to comment on them, let's hear what you have to say.
Yeah, well, I'm Peter Jungen. I have just two remarks. On inequality, there were some remarks which was called obscene. Maybe you could comment a bit about the trade-off between economic dynamism growth on the one hand and the inequality. I'm referring to some of the work of Salah Martin on this within and between countries inequality, which looks a little bit different from what was said. Defining GDP or growth in a different way would, in a way, of course, meaning defining inequality eventually away. I don't think that was the idea. The other thing on the uncertainty, so many people were surprised about the developments, but I think we all have to see and understand much better now that the relation with innovation is so important as the base for progress. If innovation was predictable, it wouldn't be any innovation. And so with the uncertainty in a future open system, I like to quote Hayek from 1964 when he said it is a time to acknowledge the high degree of our ignorance 4 to 7 years later. Obviously, it doesn't look that the trade has made too much progress on that.
Thank you. John Kay, and then the gentleman here.
I want to try and answer a question that you posed to the panel, which I think was not answered and is a very interesting question. And that is why there isn't a European economics that differs from American economics in the way there's a European political economy or European policies that differ from American policies. And the explanation I would conjecture is that any kind of communitarian thinking was so discredited by the Nazi era that the field has essentially been left open to individualistic ideas in both economics and political philosophy, which are primarily American in origin and of which completely dominated the field over the post-war era. And the corollary of that is that unless we in Europe are prepared to think more about ways of thinking about economics that make more use of group identity, concepts of solidarity, and more broadly the ways in which economic institutions are embedded in social institutions, we will not actually make progress in developing an economics that is better fitted to understanding these kind of institutions. And as a matter of fact, they might be better fitted to understanding American institutions as well, but that's another matter.
That's a fascinating answer. I can't resist adding to that. It's perhaps not just the memory of the Nazis, but the much greater influence of Marxism in European thinking and economics, which ironically has actually opened it up to the opposite. Yeah, yeah. And finally, there was a question or a comment here.
Thank you very much. My name is Arturo O'Connor from the Central Bank of Argentina. I think we have three focuses. One is markets, the other one is the couple democracy citizens, and then special interests. On the question of the relationship between markets and democracy citizens, I think there, and it has a lot to do with what Mr. John Kay has just said, there economic theory seats rather uncomfortably, because under modern democracy, citizens are supposed to have not only the right to vote, but the right to survive, for instance. And in market theory, that doesn't enter at all. I mean, people could just starve, and that's it. So there, I think there is a point where economics or economic theory has to kind of do a lot of reconstructing in a way. But then there is a question about special interests, and particularly in finance, which I think is very important. And there, I think economic theory sits much more comfortably. It might be or might not be that it was predicted, the financial crisis, but there is quite a good basis, a sound theory about how do you and how much do you have to regulate finance. And if it wasn't taken up, and it is still not being taken up, it's because of the power of special interests. And that has nothing to do with economic theory. Yeah. And economic theory is on a very sound or a reasonably sound basis there after work that has been done in the last decades, and there's a lot of the gentlemen that did produce this thing. Even about what Mr. Soro was speaking about. I mean, Mr. Shin and Danielson speak about endogenous risk, which has a lot to do with your reflexivity question about the way in which individuals interacting multiply either up to the upside or the downside, whatever happens in the financial system. And then you have the international national question, but that's another story, and we can learn a lot about what happened in the 1930s about that. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Well, that's been a fantastic discussion. We could go on all evening. Shall everybody just take 1 minute to react to any part of that you think is relevant?
Okay, the effect of inequality, say on growth, has not been proved. It's not because it exists a theory which has proved it, but it is proven. I know of another attempt at modeling that by Philippe Aghion, for example, who have exactly the converse conclusion. But just to give one example, if the inequality leads to a high level of insecurity, you may be sure that insecurity is not a good environment for innovation. But people will not try to innovate because the risk is too high. So maybe the too high degree of inequality, everything is relative, could lead to a decrease in the capacity to innovate and then to lead to a decrease in growth.
Thank you very much. Harold?
I found John Kay's answer really intriguing and at the same time also rather worrying, because it seemed to me that if you really go along this path of trying to develop what is particular about particular groups and how they have particular ways of going about things, you're going to have this sort of polarization, which to some extent you already do in Europe. I mean, exactly this is the discussion that's emerging, that Germans think that they have a better way of doing economics than Greeks do, and so they're translating that into political terms and putting it into a really terrible political pressure. So I am rather worried and skeptical about that particular attempt to do this.
Okay.
Yes.
Sure.
I like the comments. I thought the comments were excellent.
Well,
I wish we could have some more.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I don't know. Can we? No, probably not. Well, we've got a whole weekend, I suppose, to have the comments in private and many more sessions. I hope that will be at least as interesting as this one. And thank you very much. I think that's been a great way to launch the conference.